What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. This is actually going to be a, get rid of this real quick. This is going to be a double bow build on a Nightblade. The raid lead for Mayflower actually uses a build similar to this. This isn't his exact build, like I didn't just copy it, I didn't just ask him for his build and copied it. I kind of tried to piece together what he was using, or tried to kind of guess at what he was using. So this is kind of my take on the double bow Nightblade build. So like I said, the raid lead for Mayflower does have a build, double bow build, that he sometimes uses for fights where he either wants to have some fun, not play the typical dual wield bow build, or he would like to stay at range. So Nightblades are one of the two classes, the other one being the Warden, that can actually be fairly successful with a double bow build. The other classes, they will be able to pull off a double bow build, but not quite as good as a Warden or a Nightblade can. So, just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, our CP point distributions, our skills, going over our racial choices, our attributes, things like that. And then once we finish talking about our build information, we'll be going over the rotation, kind of what's going on through my head while I was making up the rotation, and kind of what your priority should be with specific skills, why we're choosing certain abilities, things like that. And then finally, I'll do a 6 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS you can pull with this build, as well as the sustain that you can expect to see while using this build, at least, in probably like a pug 4-man content. Obviously in a 12-man organized raid, you'll have better sustain because you'll have orbs, you'll have off balance and things like that, helping out your sustain there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. First, we will go ahead and look at our gear. So we are going with a monster helm set with this. So one of the options that I played around with was actually using two 5-piece sets, because we are using the Master's Bow and the Maelstrom Bow. So I've played around with two 5-piece sets, but I found that using the Monster Helm set generally is going to be a better overall for our DPS. And so the only Monster Helm sets that we can really realistically use are going to be Stormfist and Velidreths. I found that both of them pulled about even when it came to DPS, but Stormfist generally is going to be at the very least a little bit more consistent, because with Velidreth you do have to wait for that spore to spawn and travel to the enemy. With Stormfist at least, you'll know that the proc will occur right on top of the enemy. That being said though, Stormfist does have the disadvantage of not being very good for mobile bosses. So if you're up against, a good example would be St. Lotus in Asylum, who teleports around a lot, Stormfist might not be the best choice there, because Lotus might decide to teleport out of that proc, which basically ends up wasting that proc. But overall, you can really choose whichever one. Velidreth does have that additional weapon damage, but Stormfist does have the additional stam regen, which helps out your sustain. So you can kind of pick whichever one you want to get. Velidreth is going to be a little bit more difficult to get, just because you do have to complete Cradle of Shadows on Vet, so you will have to get the DLC. Stormfist you can get from Tempest Island, which is a fairly easy vet non-DLC dungeon, so it is in the base game. I would stick with Stormfist until you get the time to pick up Velidreths. Now for our 5-piece, I'm using Mechanical Acuity here, but you do have plenty of different options depending on the specific group that you're running with. So for example, if you're going solo or you're doing 4-man content, you might want to use Two-Fanged Snake instead, or Spriggans. If you're in a organized raid group, you might need to use Night Mother's Gaze as a debuff set. You might need to use War Machine potentially as a buff set, although War Machine's not going to be quite as strong on a double bow build as it would be on a typical dual wield Nightblade. You could be using Sunder. Again, you won't necessarily be using Sunder too much, because at least I believe I'm only using one heavy attack per front bar rotation, so Sunder's not going to be very great on this particular build. Morag Tong is another potential option, but that's seeing less and less use, because you will need to have like 3 or 4 stand DKs in the group in order to make the most out of using Morag Tongs. Then of course you can use Acuity, which I have here. You can go with Hunding's Rage, or you can go with 5-piece VO, although we are using VO jewelry, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend going with 5-piece VO. at least with this particular build. So we are going with Acuity here. So when we go over our parse, and I'll mention this again when before we begin our parse, because we're not using a debuff set, our parse might be a little bit on the lower end compared to other builds, just because we are not getting that additional penetration from Nightmother's Gaze or Sunderflame. I am running 6-1, so I have 6 medium pieces, all with stamina enchant. Then I have 1 heavy piece with a stamina enchant here. I have my heavy piece being the chest here, just because I'm using Acuity, which is a crafted set. But if you are using something like Nightmother's Gaze, again, you can go with the heavy chest because that is crafted. But if you're using like Sunderflame or more like Tongue, which only comes in medium, then your heavy armor set piece will have to come from your either monster helm or your monster shoulders. So that's something to keep in mind there. For our jewelry, we're going with 3-piece Vicious Ophidian. You can go with 3-piece Agility instead if you would like. Just make sure you're getting the robust Agility jewelry. We have 3 weapon damage enchants here. Nightblades do have better sustain overall compared to most other stamina DPS classes. Combine that with Stormfist, and you won't really see a need to use a regen glyph here. So we're sticking with 3 weapon damage glyphs on our jewelry pieces. Now for our weapons. For our front bar, we're going with a Master's Bow infused with a poison damage enchant. And for our back bar, we're going with a Maelstrom Bow nirn honed with a Double Ravage Health poison here. So Double Ravage Health poisons can be made using Nightshade, Fleshfly Larva, and either Nirn Root or Violet Coprinus. So that's how you make those poisons here. You can go with an infused weapon damage glyph, but I found that nirn honed with the Double Ravage Health poisons ended up pushing ahead by a little bit here. You could also replace this poison damage enchant on the front bar with a weapon damage glyph if you really want to get that weapon damage glyph, but I found that poison did a little bit more compared to the weapon damage glyph. And that's pretty much it for the build. So this is going to take up use a lot of endgame content build equipment. So Master's Bow, Maelstrom Bow come from Vet Dragonstar Arena and Vet Maelstrom Arena respectively, and those are not necessarily the easiest content to clear. So this particular build is going to be a little bit limited in terms of the weapons specifically. So if you don't have the Master's Bow, you don't have the VMA Bow, you can go with the Vicious Ophidian Bow instead if you would like. Another potential option is going to be the Asylum's Bow. Obviously you don't have to get the perfected, you can go with the imperfect set, which drops from normal Asylum. If you are going to be using the Asylum Bow, you will need to change up your rotation a little bit, because you will have to use Acid Spray as one of your abilities on your front bar. I can show you what that looks like when we go over our rotation. So now let's go over the character sheet. So I am a Khajiit. You don't necessarily have to be a Khajiit. You can be a Wood Elf, you can be a Redguard, you can be an Orc, or even an Imperial if you have access to the Imperial edition. I'm just a Khajiit just because that's what our raid lead, that's the race our raid lead is. But if you are using Acuity, the extra crit from Khajiits is kind of a little bit of a waste, just because Acuity does give you a 100% crit chance. But like I said, you can use any of the stamina inclined races. Imperial is going to be the best overall, just for the max stamina plus the max health bonus, but you do need the Imperial edition. Bosmer, the Wood Elves are not a bad choice. Redguards actually aren't that bad either. They do have 10% max stamina, so they have more max stamina than any of the other base game races. However, you won't be able to make use of the Adrenaline Rush passive, so that's kind of a downside of using Redguards instead compared to the Imperials. For our attributes, I have 1 point into health and 63 points into stamina. I mean, I could have put all 64 points into stamina if I would like. I just like to have as close to 17k health as I possibly can before using Eben for any sort of endgame content. That's just me personally. But again, you could shift that 1 point into stamina if you would like. Just generally speaking though, I like to stick around 17k. That's typically going to be just barely enough to survive a couple of the heavier hits that you might face in vet content. This is obviously with food. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Warrior, so we're getting a nice weapon damage boost from the Warrior. Now, if you are in an unorganized raid group, you might want to use the Lover instead. Only use the Lover if that's going to push your penetration up to the cap. If it ends up going over the cap by a significant margin, remember that the penetration cap is 18,200, then the Lover is going to be a DPS loss compared to the Warrior. If you have basically all the debuff sets, stamina debuff sets in a group, so Nightmother's Gaze, Sunderflame, a Crusher Enchant, and Alkosh, You won't need to use the lever. The lever will actually end up putting you over the penetration cap by a fair margin, anywhere between 1 to 3k, depending on the specific debuffs that you have out. So just stick with the warrior for stamina DPS, and even a raid group that just has Night Mother's Gaze, Sunderflame, and Torg's Crusher. You know that the lever is just going to put you over the cap by way too much in order to justify its use. And we are using max health, max stamina food. Now for our abilities. So this is with the Master's Bow on the front bar. So for our front bar here, we have Killer's Blade. This is really here for the some of the assassination passives, specifically pressure points. Focused Aim. This is going to be one of our main spammables. Poison Injection for the Master's Bow effect. Relentless Focus for the bow procs. Stalwart Guard. This is for the minor force. So I would use this in a raid. Basically, you want to guard, preferably a magic DPS, because they don't have a readily available source of minor force yet. Your stamina DPS will typically be running a rearming trap for that minor force. So you run Stalwart Guard and you guard one of your magic DPS, and you will take more damage if you are using Stalwart Guard. So that's something to be careful of if you do decide to use Stalwart Guard. And then our ultimate's going to be Flawless Dawnbreaker. For our back bar, Mirage is here for the assassination passive, because we do need to have an assassination ability slotted in order to have our additional 10% critical damage from Hemorrhage. So that's why we have Mirage here. We're not really going to use it. But you can replace this with any of the assassination abilities here, so even Piercing Mark or Reaper's Mark would be a pretty good choice. Probably Reaper's Mark for trash pulls, so you get that additional major berserk and that heal during trash pulls, but it's kind of up to you which specific one you want to pick to use. Then we have Razor Caltrops, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes, and then we have the double bar Stalwart Guard for using it, and then our primary ultimate here is going to be Ballista. Now if you aren't going to be using Stalwart Guard, then you do have a couple of options here. I would just stick with just putting Fighters Guild abilities here, so like Rearming Trap. For that additional weapon damage, so you get 3% additional weapon damage while you have a Fighter's Guild ability up on there. So that's what I would personally do. I would just put something like Rearming Trap on both bars there instead of Stalwart Guard. Or you can go with a Lightweight Beast Trap if you'd like, so you still get that minor force. But you can also just use Rearming Trap. You can run in, drop it, and then back out if you do need to play at range. Now let's replace our front bar now with an Asylum's Bow. So if we are going to be using an Asylum's Bow instead, you will have to replace Killer's Blade here with Acid Spray. So we still have Relentless Focus here as our assassination ability, so we still get the Hemorrhage, and we do lose a little bit of crit from pressure points. We lose 2% crit, but that's the trade-off that you have to make if you're going to be using Acid Spray. So this is going to be a very different rotation compared to using a Master's Bow, and I'll go over that once we finish going over our CPs. So for our champion points, we have 75 points into Mooncap into Nasty. That's pretty much par for the course when it comes to stamina DPS. That leaves 90 points to put across the remaining nodes, so I like to go with a kind of balanced approach. So I have 31 Shadow Ward, 28 Tumbling, and 31 Warlord, but you can kind of divide the 90 points however you'd like, depending on which specific passives from the different constellations you would like to have. For our blue CPs, so this is what I found, what constellations gave me as the best potential combination of CP points. So 64 into Mighty, 25 into Piercing, 66 into Precise Strikes, 34 into Thaumaturge, and 51 into Master at Arms. Now do keep in mind I have 25 points to Piercing here because my particular raid groups, we don't run Alkash, or rather we only recently moved over to Alkash, so this is still using the infused Torog's Crusher enchants only for our penetration, so that's why I have 25 points to Piercing. Since we've moved over to Alkash, I've actually dropped this down to 5 points. That's just to account for Alkash downtime. So if you do have Alkash in group, then you will need to run a different set of CPs. So what I would recommend doing is picking up combat metrics and well as constellations. You're basically going to do a parse, preferably with your raid group, so you have all the buffs and things like that, a realistic parse. Basically, you're going to save that fight and just open up combat metrics like you would normally. Like so. I don't have a fight here, so I would have to load a fight. So if I load this fight in, for instance, then you basically hit combat metrics import, and that'll import all the relevant information, including weapon penetration. Now, if you did do a dummy parse, just set this to the penetration that you would have in your raid group. Then go over to the champion points tab and hit calculate, and that will tell you your optimal CP point distributions based on the CP optimization formula. You will have a before F value and a after F value here, and a new F value. So generally speaking, if your new F value is going to be greater than the old F value by around the 0.06, 03, that's the cutoff that I use, and I would change your CPs. Otherwise, it's not going to be that big of a deal. A difference of 0.01 in your F value is not really going to exceed that big of an increase in your DPS. Alright, so let's finish up our CPs here. And then finally, for our red CPs, I take a one-size-fits-most approach. So this is not going to be optimal for every single trial. Some trials, obviously, you have different sources of damage. So for example, Hell Ra, you'll be taking more physical damage. So you might want to take points out of Elemental Defender, put them into Hardy, put them into Ironclad, put them into Medium Armor Focus, to help reduce damage that you're taking while doing that trial. For a more balanced approach, though, go with 61 Ironclad, 51 Thick Skin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, you can put 10 points into Quick Recovery if you'd like, so you get that Field Position passive, which reduces the damage you take while you're resurrecting somebody. It's not a terrible idea, but most stamina DPS will not be resurrecting people because you don't have access to a shield, so I really don't see a point in putting 10 points into Quick Recovery here, at least as a stamina DPS. Okay, so now that we've got all the build stuff out of the way, let's go over our rotation. So just as a reminder, we are using the Asylum Bow, and then I'll go over the Master's Bow. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you enter any sort of fight is going to buff up, obviously, with your Leeching and Relentless. Obviously, you want to keep buff that up, and then you're going to obviously use a potion. We're not going to use it because we're just demonstrating a rotation. Starting on your back bar here, if you are using Stalwart Guard, make sure to have that active before you enter the fight. If you're not, if you're using something like Lightweight Beast Trap or just Rearming Trap like I am here, go ahead and drop your trap first on your back bar. Start off with Endless Hail, then Caltrops, then do your ultimate, and then on your front bar here. Oh. Okay, so I messed up a little bit here, so I'll just redo it from the beginning again. So buff up first, drink your potion, start with Endless Hail, Caltrops. If you have your proc, use that. Acid Spray, Poison Injection, Acid Spray. Then I like to do a heavy attack into Focused Aim. Acid Spray, Poison Injection, Acid Spray, and then Heavy Attack into your Snipe. Then again, Heavy Attack into Focused Aim. And that's basically the rotation with an Asylum Bow there. So generally the idea is on your front bar you want to start with an Acid Spray so you get that Asylum proc. And then you want to Light Attack Weave or Heavy Attack Weave into a Poison Injection first. Then Light Weave into an Acid Spray. And then I like to Heavy Attack Weave directly into Focused Aim. It's kind of up to you if you want to do a light weave or a heavy weave. So that will give you one heavy attack per front bar rotation. You do have some time available, so to do 2 heavy attacks. So you can see here, if you don't have to re-up, you can heavy attack after Acid Spray. Like so. And that does give you enough time to go to your back bar and get your back bar dots running again. So that's one option you can use instead of going with one heavy attack. Do 2 heavy attacks on your front bar with the Asylum build. That helps out your sustain by a decent margin there, adding in that extra heavy attack. So now let's get out of combat and do the rotation with a Master's Bow in the front bar now. Come on. We're still in combat, so it's not letting us swap. There we go. Alright, so for here, again, I have Killer's Blade up here for the additional pressure points passive. Again, you don't necessarily need to do that. Let's reset this dummy so it doesn't die on us. The Master's Bow rotation is going to be pretty similar. Again, buff up again, drink your potion beforehand, drop your rearming trap, make sure your guard is up if you're using that. Same rotation on the back bar, Endless Hail, Caltrops, ultimate, poison injection first, then focus aim. I do 2 focused aims, then a heavy attack and do a focus aim. I did sit on that so again, I like to do a heavy attack, so I just try to do a heavy attack every once in a while when I can. So that's basically my rotation there. So what's really important while you're on your front bar here, the beginning of your front bar rotation should always start with poison injection, so you have that Master's Bow proc going on. And that's basically the rotation with the Master's Bow on your front bar instead. So we're not going to be using Killer's Blade, that's really just there for pressure points. You can replace Killer's Blade on the front bar with something like Silver Bolts if you'd like from the Fighters Guild to get additional 3% weapon damage as well, just because that's pretty much going to be a dead spot. You can use Vigor instead there if you'd like for a nice heal, but that, again, that's kind of up to you, how you feel with your own survivability and things like that. Again, the most important thing when you have the Master's Bow on the front bar is to open with poison injection, so that way you always have that weapon damage boost from the Master's Bow active on your front bar. Even if you have a bow proc ready, just use a poison injection because that'll make your bow proc a little bit stronger. And so on your back bar here, make sure that you have the first tick of Endless Hail going so the Maelstrom enchant will start taking effect. If you swap out of your back bar too quickly, and basically if your Endless Hail first tick starts on the front bar, you won't get the Maelstrom buff, so make sure to use Endless Hail first, then Caltrops. Typically speaking, if you are going Endless Hail then Caltrops, you will have that first tick happen while you're on your back bar, so you will get the Maelstrom boost, but just be very careful of that. Alright, so now let's go ahead and do a 6 million dummy parse. So like I said, this is going to be a little bit lower compared to, let's say, Stamina Warden parse, the Bobo build for that I have for that, just because we don't have a source of major fracture, and that gives us between 8 to 10% additional DPS just from the penetration gain from major fracture. We also aren't using a debuff set, so we are losing a little bit of DPS from that. Actually if we oh no, have to reload UI. Oops, we have to reload UI because Common Metrics decided to bug out on me. But for this particular build, we're actually only sitting at about like around 3k or so penetration, so we are far below the cap here. So that's something to keep in mind when we do our parse. And I will try to narrate throughout it, but I will be focusing on getting my parse ready. So one thing to make note of on a bow build is that you do get more damage out of your bow abilities the farther back you are, so I'll be doing the parse from way back here instead. That was a little bit weird on the bar swap there. So again, you always want to open up with a poison injection first. Nope, that time I didn't open up with the poison injection. So we still had a poison injection running there, so that's why I went to bow proc right away. Do a heavy attack real quick. So remember that you always want to make sure that your Endless Hail is basically almost done by the time you go to reapply it, because the last ticks of your Endless Hail are typically going to be your strongest. That's because of that Maelstrom proc there. Oh. Heavy attack here. So I put my heavy attack wherever it fits, which is why you won't see me like put it in a consistent place in the rotation. One thing to remember too is that you won't be able to bar swap out of focused aim. So if you intend on bar swapping out of a focused aim, you're going to have to do a heavy light attack first. Heavy attack here. And your poison injection, then do bow proc. Do a heavy attack here. You also won't be able to drink any potions while you're channeling focused aim too. That's something you want to keep in mind when you're hitting your potion button. Alright, so there we go. That is the double bow Parse with the Nightblade. So let's go ahead and take a look at our combat metrics report. So like I said here, our physical penetration's really low with this particular build using Acuity. We're sitting at about 3.6 K penetration because focused aim does give us, let's see, minor fracture here. So you can see here, we did have some minor fracture, which gives us 1320. Tack that on to the about 2400 penetration that I have from piercing, and that's where we get this value from. So we don't have major fracture like we would on a typical Nightblade Parse. We don't have major fracture as we would on a Warden Parse. So that's why our numbers are a little bit lower here. So we would be pulling between 32 and 33 if we had major fracture for this Parse here. So we did pull 30k, just barely above 30k here. We can see that focused aim is going to be our strongest ability here, and it does hit for pretty hard actually. It hits about as hard as the bow proc, maybe a little bit harder. And this hail still up there with the DPS that it pulls. It is just our strongest source of DPS for any sort of stamina DPS here. Then our light weaving is pretty important here as well. You can see our light attacks made up a pretty good chunk of our DPS here. And that left us with a pretty good uptime on Hawkeye. That's kind of why we want to make sure we're light weaving really well, so we have, you know, our Hawkeye stack this entire time. We do want all 5 stacks of Hawkeye. That just helps give us a lot of extra bonus damage to focused aim, endless hail, and poison injection, as well as ballista here. So that's everything sort of falls down in place here. So you can see Stormfist actually isn't all that powerful. It didn't break 1000 DPS, so that's kind of to be expected. But this is probably the best monster helm that we can use besides Velidreth. Velidreth's, again, does have its own weaknesses, but it will pull a little bit pretty close to Stormfist, if not a little bit ahead of where Stormfist is right now. So 30k, that's definitely viable for most endgame content. You know, if you were to show this parse to a vet trial guild, probably not, you know, a high-end guild like you know, accidental aggro or mechanically challenged, but you know, 30k, that's plenty for the vet Craglorn trials. That is borderline for, you know, vet maw. So, you know, this build is definitely capable of pulling pretty decent DPS. It's not going to pull as high as a dual-wield bow build, but, you know, if you want to play around a little bit, have some fun, and have a ranged stamina class, then a double bow Nightblade build might be right for you. The raid lead that runs this build, or a similar build to this, can pull, you know, he pulled 45k on the first boss of Halls, so, you know, that's not a bad parse for a ranged double bow build. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.